All right, let's dive into one of the biggest stories there is, the story of civilization itself. We're going to look at how these incredible societies rise up, why they sometimes fall apart, and maybe, most importantly, what they leave behind for the rest of us.
It's a mystery that just pulls you in. You look at these amazing cliff dwellings built by the ancestral Puebloans, and you can't help but wonder, where did everybody go? How does a society that seems so permanent, so powerful, just fade away? That's the big question we're going to tackle today.
But okay, before we can talk about how a civilization collapses, we first have to get on the same page about what one even is. So let's lay out the blueprint.
At its heart, a civilization is really just a new, much more complex way of organizing people. It all kicked off thousands of years ago, when agriculture let us stop wandering and finally settle down. We started building cities, and with cities came a whole new rule book for how to live together. And what's really amazing is that this wasn't some one-off event. This massive social experiment just started popping up independently all over the globe. You see it in Mesopotamia, along the Nile in Egypt, in the Indus Valley, China, and all the way over in Central America. So even though every civilization has its own unique flavor, historians have figured out that they're all kind of built from the same basic stuff. There seem to be 6 key ingredients, a set of common building blocks.
And here they are, big cities or population centers, massive architecture and unique art, some form of shared communication, organized systems to run things, a complex division of labor, so not everyone is a farmer anymore, and finally, social and economic classes. Let's zoom in on a few of these because they're absolutely crucial.
First up, shared communication. You can think of this as the nervous system of a civilization. It's the network that lets ideas, laws, and culture spread. Without it, you can't have complex trade, new technology, or government.
And get this, it doesn't always have to be writing. The Inca Empire, for example, didn't have a written script as far as we know. Instead, they used these incredible things called quipus. They're basically knotted strings, but they were a super sophisticated system for keeping records of everything from taxes to census data. It was a complete language, without a single written word.
Next up, civilizations like to build big. We're talking pyramids, temples, giant walls. These monumental structures do more than just look cool. They project power, they anchor a culture's identity, and they build a legacy that can last for thousands of years. Great Zimbabwe is a perfect example of this lasting power. These incredible stone ruins were once the capital of a kingdom that was home to over 10,000 people. But it's not just some ancient relic. Today, it's a powerful political symbol for the modern nation of Zimbabwe. Its famous bird sculptures are right there on the national flag and on their money.
Okay, so you've got a ton of people and some amazing buildings. How do you actually manage all of that? Well, you need infrastructure and administration. These are the systems, the roads, the laws, the bureaucracy that are working behind the scenes to run the whole show. And, nobody did this better than the Romans. They were the absolute masters of administration. Their roads stitched together a massive empire. Their aqueducts delivered fresh water to crowded cities, and their legal system created a framework that shaped European law for centuries. Heck, our very word civilization comes from their Latin word for citizen, civis. So we've got our basic civilization built. What happens next? Well, they grow. Civilizations are never static. They're always expanding their influence, and they usually do it through a combination of a few key drivers. These 3 things, trade, conflict, and innovation, are pretty much the engines of growth. Trade brings in new stuff and new ideas. Conflict expands your borders, and innovation gives you the new tools you need to manage everything. Let's look at how this played out with the Khmer civilization over in Southeast Asia. The Khmer Empire was a real powerhouse. Its growth was totally fueled by all 3 of these drivers. They were connected to the Silk Road, which brought in goods and huge new ideas like Buddhism. They were constantly in conflict with their neighbors, expanding their territory. And, critically, they innovated. They built these complex irrigation systems to produce enormous amounts of rice, enough to feed the huge populations of cities like their capital. But, as we all know, what goes up often comes down. And that brings us right back to our central mystery. Why do these incredible, powerful, and innovative societies eventually fall apart? Now, it's rarely just one single thing. But historians have noticed that the reasons for collapse usually fall into one of 3 main buckets, and often it's a mix of them. Either the society breaks down from the inside, it gets overwhelmed by an outside force, or the environment it relies on just gives out. And you can see these patterns play out all through history. For the classic Maya, it was mostly internal change, things like disease and big population shifts that just broke their society from within. For the Aztec Empire, it was a sudden and violent end from external pressure, the invasion of the Spanish. And for the Indus Valley civilization, it looks like environmental collapse was the main culprit, as climate change made their crops fail. So we see these patterns over and over. But this brings us to a really fascinating twist. We always ask how civilizations get lost. But what if lost is the wrong word entirely? What if collapse isn't really the end of the story?
Yeah, exactly. The ancestral Puebloans didn't just vanish into thin air. Their society changed, people migrated, new groups like the Zuni and the Hopi formed their own societies. The people and their culture carried on. So the point is, civilizations don't always die. They evolve. And their echoes are literally all around us today. Our modern legal systems are built on a Roman foundation. The numbers we use every single day, they were developed and spread during the Islamic Golden Age. Angkor Wat is right there on Cambodia's flag. The past is never really past. It just echoes through time. And this idea of a shared legacy, an echo, isn't just ancient history. It shapes our world right now. Think about the idea of Western civilization. It's a concept that groups nations like the G7 together based on shared roots that go all the way back to Greece and Rome. It just goes to show how these ancient identities are still incredibly powerful forces today. Which, of course, leaves us with one last big question. When we look at our own complicated, globally connected world, at our art, our technology, our laws, what are we building? What kind of echo will our civilization leave for the future?